Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Tulsa World Opinion podcast. I'm Ginnie Graham, the editorials editor.
I'm Bob Doucette, an editorial writer and columnist.
And there are a lot of things that happened this past week to talk about our weekly roundup. And there were a couple of big things that happened right after our last podcast that we didn't get to address last week. And the big one was the Oklahoma State Board of Education knocked the Tulsa Public Schools accreditation for violating House Bill 1775, which basically says, don't teach anything to kids that make them feel guilty for being whatever race or gender they are. But what got me on it was that they never saw the evidence of that. So,
yeah.
I mean, when you watch that, I'll tell you my impressions was that it was, and the board, as a board, we came together and it's obvious TPS is being targeted. And board member Estela Hernandez said, because Tulsa is the biggest district, we're going to use them as an example. And because TPS was pulled out of the agenda specifically, even though Mustang also had a similar allegation, but they wanted to give a more harsh punishment to TPS just because it's TPS.
Yeah.
And that's in line with what Governor Stitt has been targeting with Tulsa. His education secretary, Ryan Walters, has. And we've always suspected it, and now we know it. But even if you just take your opinion about Tulsa Public Schools and set it aside, what actually happened at that meeting was they never saw the evidence. The attorney in the agency said that there was a violation of the spirit of the law, and it was a close call, but he wouldn't release the materials to the board or to the public saying it's copyrighted. But even then, the materials, he said, didn't violate the law. It came from background, a training, a professional development training. A teacher who is believed to be from Memorial High School got offended that she said, had to do with implicit bias, that they talked about it, and that she felt it was wrong. They wouldn't release the materials, but then he said the materials wasn't the violation. It was a conversation around it. So it was they had an audio of the meeting. And so, but he wouldn't release the audio because he didn't have it or whatever. So no one has seen or heard what this teacher was offended by. And it comes down to teachers were having a conversation about the idea of everyone having some sort of bias. And we can't even talk about race now. And you're going to, punish an entire district on evidence you never saw. No one has seen this evidence. So what is your, I know what my takeaway is. What do you think the whole ramifications of this are?
A few things. All right. It's a pretty serious deal what they're talking about, what they did actually. It's almost, I don't want to say it was like a sanctioning, but it kind of is, right?
Right.
Based on, you can have a district with thousands of employees and one person can tank your accreditation. One.
Right.
And they can do it in a way to where when this evidence is brought forward, it doesn't have to be brought forward.
It could just be one guy in the agency.
The whole thing about being copyrighted, what a bullcrap reason that is.
Yeah, I thought that, especially if you're going to use it to tank an entire district's accreditation.
That's just garbage. So
yeah.
let's just call it for what it is. It does sound like they were like, you know what? This is the next step in a path to hammer this school district so we can just keep hammering them probably through the end of the campaign season for whatever political aims that you're trying to get. The third take that I had on this goes right back to when I first read House Bill 1775. And it's written in such a way as, if taken at face value, it's very innocuous, but it is extremely vague. And we are actually now at the point where we have to question that if somebody feels uncomfortable with the idea of teaching something like slavery, civil rights movement, the race massacre.
And what if a kid comes to school and says, what's this Black Lives Matter about?
Yeah.
Shouldn't a
Can you
teacher
talk
be
about
able
it?
to answer that?
And they should be able to answer it, but if they feel that they're going to get themselves and the district in trouble,
Mhm.
this, my personal opinion, if you really want to make it to what the supposed intent is, that nobody should feel personal guilt just based on the color of their skin, then you need to write the law very intentionally to do that, because it's not written that way. It is extremely vague. And I know it'll never happen, not in this legislature, but 1775 needs to be repealed for this very reason. You have an entire state with teachers and administrators who have no idea now what is inbounds and what is out of bounds when it comes to teaching very real subject matter in regards to race. That's ridiculous.
Well, and it doesn't, I mean, if these are hard issues that we're dealing with in our culture right now.
Yeah.
The way to deal with that is with more conversation, not banning conversation. And that's what this has done. But the other takeaway I come from this was a warning shot from the state board, which is highly politicized at this point, except for one, Carlisha Williams Bradley, because she was the one, and she's the only one from Tulsa, and I think the only Black member, that she pointed out that TPS was pulled out of that agenda for this targeting when they weren't talking about the other in Mustang. And in Mustang's case, they actually self-reported and said, hey, we think we have a violation. We took care of it internally. And so the board said, oh, yeah, we probably ought to be harsh on them just to look fair. But it's a warning shot to other districts saying, get in line with us politically and ideologically, or we're going to come after you. And that's just straight up bullying. I mean, that's just, they're not. And again, they have not seen or heard the evidence either. And that bothers me.
Yeah. How do you do that without actually seeing and hearing the evidence? You're just taking it at someone's word. That's not how this works.
Right. I mean, if you're going to take this kind of hard line, then and that should be in the law too. Bring it forward. But this law was so poorly written, so knee-jerk reaction, and it is not going to improve education at all. If anything, it's going to go backwards. And TPS, keep in mind, one of the most diverse districts there is. We have kids in our schools who are descendants of race massacre survivors. And they're not going to be able to talk about these issues. And what they were knocked for, the district, was not even what they were teaching. It was for a conversation among teachers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, talk about a chilling effect in your workplace. I mean, if you can't trust your coworkers to have an honest conversations about what you're facing, I mean, that's not good for anything. So, but our board came down pretty strong and said, we just don't have any faith in this board. Beyond Carlisha Williams Bradley, who stood up to him and said, you're showing your bias. All the rest of them, I don't think they can govern with any sort of fairness. I think they're just
an analogy I made a little while back about you can't complain about the sad state of your car if you're the one opening the hood and taking a baseball bat to the engine. Well, you can add our state school board to the list of Oklahoma public officials who are taking a baseball bat to our car. So I don't get it. I don't understand why it's being this way. I don't understand why we're not actually trying to do things to make it to where teachers can teach as effectively as possible. We're just putting up more roadblocks. We're putting up more mandates that make it harder and harder at a time when teachers are increasingly saying, I've had enough, I'm out. In
record numbers. That was the other editorial that the board the members wanted to address, which was, we have more openings across the state than we've ever had historically. We are what, a week or two away from school starting, and there are hundreds and hundreds of jobs that are not being filled. Yeah. And so the board is focused on this stupid political thing when they aren't doing anything to help out this teacher and support staff pipeline. And we had school districts around Tulsa that had to close because they didn't have enough bus drivers, because they didn't have any teachers that day because of whatever reason. The crisis is real. And until Oklahomans really acknowledge that. And also, this whole idea of metro and rural, the rural lawmakers in the rural areas know whatever happens in metro, it eventually comes to them. These issues, we aren't in, there's not like little fences around our cities. So yeah, that was
most definitely.
Well, and that comes down to the vouchers. The Speaker Pro Tem Greg Treat says vouchers are going to come back. He's planning on bringing it back. Now, I'm not sure the House Speaker Charles McCall is on board with that. But this iteration of the voucher bill will be just for the metro areas, just for a certain amount, as if the metros, I mean, it's still the underlying problems aren't addressed, which, and I hope again, rural lawmakers and rural people understand that for every dollar that goes to a private school in the metro areas, that's one less dollar they get. I mean, and there's still no transparency. There's no reporting of academic progress. So we don't know whether these kids are actually doing better in a private school or not. And again, it just doesn't help public schools. 90% of Oklahoma kids go to public schools, and we're spending all this time trying to get money out of public schools. We're already 46 in per pupil spending. It baffles me as to why this is happening. And I just think there's got to be just some for-profit money to be made in that. Am I being conspiratorial there?
We got a letter to the editor that's going to be coming out on Sunday where she likens this bill to a zombie. And I just keep thinking, like, right now, it's like we've got these bills like this one. I think it's 1647, Senate Bill.
That was what it was last time. It was Senate Bill 1647. Who knows what it'll be next time? And,
you think it's dead, but it's not. And then all of these bills like it come rising from the dead, like a bad episode of The Walking Dead. Here comes the bad legislation that's going to come to eat our brains. Yeah, I don't understand why people didn't get the message last time. I mean, it didn't even pass the Senate.
Well, barely.
It was not going to get heard in the House.
Yeah.
So there's a pretty clear message from lawmakers that they're listening to constituents and saying, hey, let's not do this. I mean, we're talking about a very ideologically almost monolithic legislature at this point, and there's serious division on it that should give you some pause.
Right.
But let's just let the zombies run amok.
But there were 22 senators that voted to spend up to $161 million and send to private schools, which are largely in metro areas. Yeah. But then when it came time to actually doing the budget, public schools were kept nil. They got 17 million, and of that 17 million, almost all of it was line item for certain stuff like, fingerprinting kits or whatever. Yeah. So they weren't willing to give that money to public schools. Think about that. And I hope people are listening. Find out how your senator voted.
Exactly.
Elections are coming up. But speaking of bad votes, I had a couple other editorials that, and you've been keeping up with this issue a lot, which is the toxic burn pits, the veterans. I mean, You were talking about this months ago, and you brought this to the board and said, hey, we've got to pay attention to this. And so, again, it's one of those, I'm glad you did, because now that everyone's aware of it, Senate passed it, then it came back for a vote, and both our senators voted against it.
Yeah.
When you watched this whole thing, what was your takeaway? And then they voted again, right? And then Senator Inhofe voted for it. Yes. What was Langford's reason for not supporting veterans' benefits for toxic burn pits?
I think it basically for Senator Langford, it goes to the point of cost. I think he wanted any kind of a big spending thing, especially something that's going to be recurring. He's been very cautious about that, which I can understand. We're not talking about small money here. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars. But here's the thing, and this is what got me going on this. We have for years sent soldiers overseas and, sailors and Marines and things like that to fight these wars. And literally 3.5 million service members have been exposed to these toxic burn pits. And it is now, it's kind of like this, it's kind of like Agent Orange all over again. It's like, oh, no big deal, no big deal. Well, it turned out to be a pretty freaking big deal. People are getting cancer from Agent Orange. And now we're starting to see people later on, after their deployments are long over and they're out of the service, they're getting sick with respiratory illnesses and cancers and things like that. And the common, nexus there is their exposure to these burn pits. So somebody got the idea, it's like, hey, if we're going to spend the money to go to war, we need to spend the money on our war fighters who come back with these illnesses. And it's generally received pretty strong support. But for some reason, I guess about a week and a half ago, a bunch of people within the Republican Party in the Senate caucus decided, you know what, we're going to oppose this because we don't like something. I don't know what it was, honestly. I've heard the reasons and they just don't stack up. But it was supposed to come up for like a vote they call for cloture. It's kind of like, well, this is our vote to say we're going to advance this for a real vote. And it didn't get enough votes to advance. And that was the one where both Senator Inhofe and Senator Langford voted against it. The backlash was enormous. It was bipartisan. I mean, when you're talking about ill veterans here, siding against them, it's not a winner. It's a bad move. So the backlash was tremendous. The Senate came back. They probably could have, I think their idea was, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to vote no against this and we're going to push it off until after the August recess. And then it was like, nope, this is not happening. Collection of vets gathering at the Capitol. Jon Stewart, former host of The Daily Show, he's been a big proponent of 9/11 first responders and their health problems that they had come up, as well as veterans and their health issues. So it was just really out there and in front. And I think the Senate was forced to say, you know what, we need to take care of this. We need to take care of this now. And then they did. So I think that's kind of a win where the people said, you don't do our veterans like this. Take care of them.
It's still disappointing that Langford didn't get on board. I mean, there's just certain things that are worth the spending. I know that spending is an issue, that we can cut somewhere. We never cut anywhere else in the budget, but we can cut somewhere else in the budget to get that. Because this goes back, I want to say, to the Kuwait. Isn't that correct? Like this started coming up in the early 90s. We're just now recognizing that because for so long they were denied benefits because they were denied that there was a link. And now there are enough veterans coming out, unfortunately, because of the wars we've been fighting, that there is a link. We need to take care of our veterans. That's the deal we make when we have a volunteer military.
That's exactly right. If you send them to war and they got problems coming back, health problems and whatnot, you don't hang them out to dry.
No,
we don't do it. Ideological concerns aside, you just can't do that. You've got to take care of your veterans. It's not like these people are coming back with a common cold. They're coming back with stuff like cancer. Come on now.
Well, Inhofe has always been a champion for veterans, so I'm glad he changed his vote on that and got out of the politics of it. But we did have a bad vote with the contraception bill. I took the lead on that one. Of course, our board agreed with this as well, and we kind of saw it coming. But out of the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe, Clarence Thomas specifically mentioned that now we can reconsider the right to contraception and the right to same-sex relationships. So Congress, the House, excuse me, had two bills. One is just right to contraceptions and one is right to same-sex marriage. Our congressional delegation voted down both of them, but both of them eventually passed. Just a second. The right to contraception one will have a hard time in the Senate, but that was one that Stephanie Bice, argued from the floor. The reasons given for voting down is they called it a distraction by the Democrats. Stephanie Bice took issue with the broad definition of contraception. And what's interesting is I think that's going to be the next frontier, that now we're going to have to defend each kind of birth control. That some people think, well, this is really contraception, but it prevents implantation. And you start getting in the weeds of what it is. And I think it was a bad vote. I think that the House was trying to defend a right that was specifically targeted. I don't think it's a distraction, especially when you're depending on those. When you're depending on contraception, when you are in a same-sex relationship and you enjoy that right, these are not distractions. The same-sex bill might actually pass in the Senate, so we'll see. So I want to set up a tease for your column this Sunday. So talk a little bit about, you looked into the stocks and buying of Congress people.
Yeah. So there was an item that Randy Kriebel had written about in one of his weekend notebooks, where he was talking about how Business Insider was reporting some stock purchases that Representative Kevin Hern and his wife had made, defense stocks, at a time that he was pushing for increased defense spending. And there's been other times where he's been pushing for oil and gas, and then his family trust buys stocks in oil and gas companies. So I started doing some digging into that, because a long-standing issue within Congress is the fact that they get information that's privy only to them, that affects a lot of different industries and sectors of the economy, that you could use that information to make very timely trades and stuff like that. If you were to do that as a stockbroker or as a member of a financial institution or something like that, where you had insider information that the public did not have, that would be illegal. It's insider trading. You can go to jail for that. But Congress had been exempted from that for a long time. Turns out that even after they passed a bill to quash that, still a lot of holes in that thing. So I did some exploring on that. I didn't want to just make this, let's pick on Kevin Hern, because he's definitely not alone. It's very bipartisan. It comes in both chambers. And it was a pretty interesting look. So the bottom line question being, when somebody is voting on different subjects that they have, and they might have holdings and stocks that would be affected by their votes, are they voting for the public good, or are they voting for personal profit? And there's a lot of gray areas here. So it was an interesting exploration.
It's like with everything, you propose something that's supposed to fix it, and sometimes it doesn't, and there are unintended consequences or loopholes or things, so you have to go back and check it. But just kind of, I wonder how much of the American people pays attention, are involved in like stock buying and trading. I mean, I know everyone, like, we might have your 401k, but it does show like what a different world they live in. Our Congress people, the members of Congress are largely wealthy people, and it's just they live in this world of, that I think most Americans don't understand, and and we're depending on them to craft legislation to police themselves. So when you think about that, sort of, I don't know.
Yeah, this is all done through the congressional ethics bodies.
That's true. Well,
so, but
I guess you can have, but it's still,
if you set it up in such a way that, I mean, it's just like I said, there's a lot of fog in this kind of thing that makes it to where you can say, it's like, well, I don't really have any say in that kind of thing. I have an investment manager who does all that stuff. But in the world of political intelligence and this and that, and if you're not familiar with the term political intelligence, this is where people will pay really close attention, do a lot of research into what committees are doing in Congress and what different kind of agencies are doing from a regulatory standpoint, getting that information quickly and then using it to inform your stock trades. doing the work that most of us, like you and me, would never be able to accomplish.
No.
So it's a funny world. And I know this came up, the Stock Act was passed in 2012, but we had stuff when the pandemic started that looked really, really fishy for a couple of senators. Very timely purchases of good stocks, very timely sales of stocks that they knew that were going to tank. Interestingly, I don't really know if anything ever happened with them outside of Georgia Senator Kelly Loeffler losing her post. She lost her reelection bid that year, but interesting stuff.
I just check my 401k every quarter. I either celebrate or cry.
Yeah,
and
don't do that.
And that's all I do. That's it. And I get mad. Like this last quarter, I'm like, how many of these can I how many hits can I take? But, it's like this.
It's buying opportunity. At our age, it's still buying opportunity. If we were 64, 65, that'd be cause for concern. But
oh yeah, that's I say, I don't know how many more. I mean, I'm 50, so I've got a few more hits, these cycles I can take.
Sure.
But my column this weekend was more of just, I started thinking about the Women's March. What was it, about 5 years ago, and what's happened since then, and just overall, like nothing to me has gotten better for women. Just it hasn't. From I mean, yes, you have the abortion right that went away, and even if I feel like I'm pro-choice and pro-life, because I feel like choice is important, and I think rights are important, no matter how I personally believe. And so losing that right's one thing, but it's also just a lot of other things. There was a report recently that came out that said Oklahoma women earn 75 cents for every dollar for a man. Oklahoma ranked last in another report for well-being of women. Even like the Deshaun Watson thing at the NFL, just like what is, and for those of you who don't know, don't cheer for Cleveland. That's all I have to say. They treated Baker Mayfield bad, and now they've got a quarterback who sexually, assaulted massage therapists in Austin, at least 25 of them. And he got a 6-game suspension. That's it. And the reason that the judge gave him just a 6-game suspension was because the assaults weren't violent in nature. I'm like, again, it's just those things just sort of added up over time for me. And I just sort of like was raging. And then Kansas voted Tuesday. And I seriously thought, you know what? They're going to go the way of Oklahoma. Oklahoma and Kansas were very similar. They're going to ban abortion, which Oklahoma already has, with one exception, to save the life of a mother. But Kansas voted like by 20 percentage points to keep the right in their constitution. And it shocked me. And it was just this glimmer of maybe people do care about women having choices and having that. And I know that that's simplifying it, but I am thinking about, that was a statewide vote. It was a referendum in Kansas. What do you think Oklahomans would vote? If Oklahomans in November could vote on, do we want to put the right to an abortion, or to at least add some more exemptions like rape and incest, how would that vote go? Do you think that, I mean, it's not unusual for legislatures to not completely reflect the constituency.
Let's say it's common.
But I am wondering, I mean, I'm to the people who are hearing this, how would Oklahomans vote? I don't know. I mean, do the Gallup polls and the different types of research shows that most Oklahomans do want abortion with some, or at least more exemptions, that we've restricted it to the point of nothing almost, but I don't know. So I don't know, but Kansas is making me think maybe people may, and it also shows there's power in voting, that maybe women didn't get anywhere when they were marching. Man, you go to the ballot box.
Yep.
It makes a difference. So I don't know. That's where my head was this week. And I sort of let it all out in a column. So I'm sure people will either hate it or embrace it. That's what we do, right?
Sure.
You don't have to agree with me. It's just my thoughts. So ending the week, last night, I finally got to see Reservation Dogs. It was premiere. It premiered at the River Spirit, last week, I believe, had all the stars and everything out. It's a Tulsa resident, Sterling Harjo's series that it's my favorite series of last year. I watched Ted Lasso. I watched all that. Reservation Dogs to me is the smartest, best series out there. Do you watch it?
I saw the series premiere and I haven't picked it up again, but I need to pick it up again.
You do.
Because I liked it. It was interesting. It was fun because it was like, man, there's people that when I was in high school and college, this is how it was.
I know these kids. Well,
Yeah.
and then even with the characters, like Wes Studi is one of my favorites, but and then Gary Farmer's another actor. When you come from a small town like I have, you know these people. They're like, oh yeah, that's that guy who just, circled Pizza Hut parking lot talking to kids all the time, and it's fun seeing things like Sonic Cups and QT references, but the story is just so smart. It's very subtle. And there were episodes where it'd be something very heavy, a teen suicide. And then in that same episode, there are these moments of just hilarity that you find yourself laughing during this episode that's very heavy. And everyone should be watching this, not just in Oklahoma, just everywhere. I think it's just, it's a critical darling. It's won all kinds of, those critics awards, and it's worth it. So watch it this weekend. That's my sign off. What about for you?
Sign off for me. Gosh, I would do that.
Don't say ride a bike or hike. We're not going to do that.
We're not going to do that?
I'm not going to do that.
No,
Actually, I'll be back to school shopping. That's what I'll be doing.
No, that's coming up, man. We're getting ready to send them kids back.
Hopefully we'll have teachers in the building. So,
Yeah, no kidding. No, I think if we're going to just go on the TV thing, there's a show on Apple TV called For All Mankind.
Okay.
We've been diving into that one. It's kind of like a revisionist version of like the space program from Apollo to, I guess right now we're in the 80s. It's been pretty good.
So, I thought you were going to say rewatch The Wire, because people
who
don't know, Bob has a lot of references to The Wire.
Of course, yeah, man's got to have a code.
Stop. All right. Well, things are probably still going to be interesting next week. So tune in to us. Have a good weekend. We'll see you later.
Adios.